And what is the next, what is the next step for solar? How do you see all this kind of, discussions about co-location with storage, any, opportunity of hybrid systems where you have wind turbines and solar power, co-located, or taking advantage of the same kind of lines? And, what kind of buyers do you see in order for this kind of situation to happen? Is it the grid? Is it something else that is stepping in to stop us on creating this kind of more efficient power plants?
I think it's so. What we are doing there, we are piloting a couple of interesting cases of co-location with sites that are already built and operational, primarily, and we are testing capacity markets type of arrangements specifically in the UK. So that is an interesting challenge in itself, particularly when you decide to co-locate somewhere where you already have a plant and maybe that plant has subsidies on it. So there is a layer of complexity in terms of stakeholder management, metering arrangements, and stakeholders are both your regulator, the grid connection company, lenders if you have any. So it's very much a reshaping a picture that was already painted in the past, and people might or might not be particularly willing to change that picture. I think we keep a very close eye on how the battery technology is developing, both from a technological perspective, but also from a cost perspective, because let's face it, so far has not been that easy to make this type of deployment and make that fly from a financial perspective. So whilst we are piloting and testing, that is not necessarily our core as yet. We are also looking at exploiting other opportunity for solar to kind of diversify the revenue stream. So very recently, UKPN has gone public to a number of warrants in the UK, trying to pilot the, as a matter of fact, purchase of reactive power from solar plants. And that is a very interesting way of looking at other ways to generate more profitability for your sites, which opens another number of questions from a technical perspective and from a reliability perspective. So I think it's where we really need to go is finding way for our production or our capacity of forecasting our production to be very reliable. Because particularly in an environment where we are entering into corporate PPAs and somebody is waiting and expecting our electricity supply to be constant and to respond to their needs, that is really critical. Making sure that we find a way to do accurate forecasting and accurate expectation of what we are going to inject.
So essentially the challenge is how do we evolve as an industry in order to be able to utilize or identify more perhaps secondary income streams for a generating plant, for an asset that is generating energy. And up until now, we've been, very comfortable sitting back, as you said previously, just taking the incentives or taking the subsidies or having a plain vanilla, PPA. But now we see that there are secondary revenue streams that we can start discussing, or there are new things that are coming up where we can actually service through our assets. And the asset manager role is critical towards managing this whole kind of process.
Part of the evolution of the industry and the maturity curve of this industry will demonstrate this more and more. I think the growth of solar if you look at the UK in particular, has been very much driven by, medium to long-term investors or even more opportunistic investors that decided to buy a few sites and then flip them. And so there has been a lot of financial engineering behind all of this and a lot of financially driven motivations. Now, I think there is a natural dichotomy between the operational risk of these sites and the financial risk of these sites. And it is very true that comparatively speaking, the operational risk of this type of power plants is not particularly high. I mean, we're not talking about CCGT, we're not talking about nuclear plants, it's a bunch of banners stick to the ground. That being said, though, I think that has led a lot of investors to kind of underestimate the level of operational risk of these sites because they are not risk-free. operationally
Do we have a
speaking.
cultural thing here as well? You see that, specific countries, for example, are reluctant to utilize asset managers. As perhaps we have a best practice example here in the UK. I mean, we are full on into asset management, but for example, going in the Netherlands, there's a bit of skepticism and there is a bit of a, I can do everything my own kind of mentality.
I think it's more than the market. I have the impression it's driven by the type of organization you are in. So and there's a bit of a mentality shift between companies and organizations that have the ambition of being IPP, for example, and companies and organizations that are perhaps more opportunistic in the way they handle their investments and they buy or develop and hold for a short to medium time frame. So I think when your expectation is to be in this industry for the long term and to own your own assets and to become more and more an IPP, then there is a level of control more than the I can do it better than anybody else type of attitude that kicks in. And it's very important to maintain control of what's happening to your site. It's even more important when your business model shifts from subsidy to corporate PPAs, whether virtual, physicals, living or otherwise, because then the obligations and the responsibilities and the risks that you're placing operationally on those power plants increases quite significantly, and that requires a very tight housekeeping and management. And I think what we have seen in the industry from an asset management perspective, and to an extent from an O&M perspective as well, has been very much a race to the bottom. So everyone is really pushing for costs to be reduced and compressed. And to be fair, there is scope for that. There has been scope for that. More automation, economies of scale. So there is a component. But I also think that there is generally, particularly on the short to medium term side owners, a bit of a misunderstanding or an underestimation of the value that good quality asset management can create. And as a consequence, the race to the bottom is a bit of a red herring, and it's going to twist.
Yeah.
It's going to have to change because the real cost of providing that type of service properly is very different. The mindset is also very different. Service providers have their scope of work. They go through it. They go through it the best that they can on a timely manner, on a good quality, with good quality and good standards. The in-house asset management of an IPP or a company like Lightsource BP has a completely different mandate. My mandate is not following a scope of work. I have a scope of work that I have to follow, of course, but that is not my mandate. My mandate is every 6 months paying out a distribution or a dividend from my solar plants which is in line with my budget.
Yeah.
That is my mandate.
Yeah.
So I can tick all the boxes of my scope of work, but if the distribution doesn't come out, I'm not getting any brownie points, to be very clear. So it's a very different shift in terms of mentality.
Someone said to me, it's about dollar signs.
It is. Why is not?
It's about dollar signs. Now, do we have the right kind of tools? Do we have the right kind of software platforms, digital tools to deliver this kind of the more demanding services? Is that side of the business also evolving as we evolve? How do you see that kind of digitalization process?
That is critical, and I think probably as an industry we are getting there. We should have been better at learning from our colleagues of wind sooner, but I'm not sure that we are there as an industry. I'm sure that everyone is piloting and start looking at new IT tools, new software that we can deploy, and they cover quite a variety of different aspects of the operation of the sites, forecasting as we were saying before, but predictive maintenance, machine learning, and try to understand not only what was my mean time between failure, but how likely it is that this will be maintained in the future and my equipment is going to fail in the next month or in the next 2 months or the next week. So all of that is very much being looked at by the industry. There has been a lot of talk about artificial intelligence in the last 12 months in the industry, which is ongoing. I'm not quite sure how many players are actually deploying successfully any such software. I think we also have an historical challenge, particularly for sites that have been installed in 2010, 2011, that period, which is um, the data point that we have available are helpful, but probably not enough for this type of sophistication. So the number of sensors we have in solar farms, for example, is nowhere near the number of sensors that you will have in a wind turbine.
Yeah.
So we have very basic sensors, very basic data coming from our sites, which still we need to get better at using, but also we need to start thinking what type of sensor do we want to retrofit. And we need a lot of engagement with component manufacturers as well to make sure that they can help us delivering products from now on going forward with a much higher level of granularity when it comes to remotely assess what's happening to the machine. Inverters, for example, are
a very good example. Yeah, I mean, you've made a point there comparing solar with the wind sector, and we've seen that specifically in wind. One of the biggest challenges that we're facing right now is components and spare parts. So this is a critical situation that I think we will face as a solar industry, in the next few years, especially as you see a lot of component manufacturers going out of business or disappearing from the market. You don't have yet aftermarket equivalent, spare parts. So this is something that we'll definitely have to face, and I agree with you that digitalization and perhaps data capture and managing, because I've seen a lot of discussions, a lot of big hype, but I haven't actually seen anyone yet actually creating this kind of artificial intelligence systems or advanced analytic systems, which is, as you said, is critical for us to mature as an industry. I'm very conscious of the time. We're already at 35 minutes. Time flies. So please allow me one more question. What do you think are the most common mistakes that we make as asset managers, and how do you think that standardization will help the industry in general moving forward? As you're aware, we're running now on the Solar Power Europe, this kind of new initiative about creating the best practice guidelines for the industry. I have the pleasure of being the vice chair and managing and driving that. So what is your opinion on mistakes and how standardization can help us move forward?
Right. So obviously we don't make any mistakes.
Oh no, of course not.
Of course not. I think more than the asset managers making mistakes, it depends on what type of organization you're sitting, to be honest. So I think more than the asset managers making mistake is a matter of alignment of expectation between the side of your business that is developing a site and making the investment decision of building a site and whatever assumption they decide to put in their fancy Excel spreadsheets, and actually what real life is. So to be fair, operational mistakes can always happen. They happen in every organization, and you miss a notification or you don't deploy people fast enough to go to site once or twice. That just happens. Let's not pretend that the world is perfect. But I think what we need to learn as asset managers is to communicate better both the value that we are creating and how much bad quality during either development or construction is costing us. Because there is a lot of that the front end of the business might or might not understand.
Right.
Or might or might not appreciate. So there are organizations in which asset management is done in-house and is considered to be a cost center, which is a very acceptable and understandable business decision. But it's very difficult for us to pinpoint specifically the value we are actually creating. Part of it is because the expectation at investment level are that everything is perfect, when nothing is ever particularly perfect in this sector. And just bridging the gap between the expectation and real life requires a very significant amount of effort that is not necessarily appreciated financially. So I think despite the mistakes in the daily management of the site that might occur, as a business, we really need to make people embrace more the value that we are creating, which is not obvious because a lot of it is avoiding the worst. And it's human nature not to consider avoiding the worst.
No, absolutely. And one of my
challenges.
points that I've been raising constantly is that perhaps we are not putting enough value to our human resources. We're not engaging our own people, the people who we expect to deliver the service to our customers. We're not engaging them enough. We're not making them, take ownership or feel proud of what they do, because we are overworking them, or we put a lot of pressure, and we don't have a clear training or progression path or whatever. So this is an ongoing situation. I totally agree with you. Your last point on standardization?
On standardization, so I'm a control freak and a process freak. So standards are critical, particularly in a job like asset management, when you constantly firefight with a lot of workload. As you were saying before, we overwork our human resources. They are always stressed out, they are with tight deadlines, and they never see the light at the end of the tunnel. So the ability of creating standards, whether it is by processing, as in business process within the organization, tools that we use, as we were saying before, predictive maintenance, or any type of advanced analytics that can help them, that is absolutely critical. And I think there is also a component of business approach that needs to be standard. How do we interact with our EPC contractors? There is never specifically a size fit all, but there is a leitmotif of cultural engagement that needs to be across the organization, needs to be shared across the organization. There is only, though, a certain level that standardization can go. I think we always have to aim to increase the efficiency of the resources that we have. But again, it is unrealistic, I think, that we will be able to substitute completely the importance of a qualified, well-trained asset manager vis-a-vis some piece of equipment and tools that can help us facilitate. It's definitely going to help, but my way of looking at asset management is very much single point of ownership with accountability for the size that I'm managing, and that requires a human brain.
And on that point, thank you very much, Adele, for taking the time to speak with me.